left, right.
We try very hard to bring up interesting topics, controversial topics, where we get the opportunity to dissect them. Not always do we have our minds made up on one side of the aisle, the other side of the aisle. I think we do a pretty good job to have discussions about them. Now, this particular episode, we got kicked off of TikTok mid-air. So I'm hoping that you side with us and decide that our conversation is one that is of interest and unbiased. But your opinion is your opinion, and I respect that. So enjoy this episode or don't. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Of course, it's good.
Cheers.
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 All right, that long pour means that we are live. Welcome to SipTalk Podcast, episode 217. My name is Justin DiGiulio out of my basement in New Jersey, joined by James, the Boswell Boswell, philosopher, philanthropist, physician specialist. James, you got a lot. Philanderer, yes. James makes his way around. Today we are talking about philosophy. And we are talking about abortion and transgender stuff, more specifically. We have tried to avoid transgender topic in general, and we've touched in the past on abortion, especially when Roe versus Wade was up
On the ropes.
When it was on the ropes. We never actually touched it afterwards. But I think, there's a really good chance we're going to get kicked off of TikTok today and off of Instagram just because of the words that we're using, abortion and transgender. But, we haven't gone deep into these topics. I don't think specifically today we're going to go that deep into either of the topics. But I think it's something to talk about when it seems to be kind of front page news. For those who even know what that means, by the way, that means back when news came via newspaper, the front page of the newspaper had these headlines on it.
When was the last time you had a newspaper?
Dude, I don't fucking know. I'm actually jealous. I run up and down the street that I live on, and some people have newspapers, and really I'm just jealous of like the Home Depot ads that they get.
So, you know what you could do?
Home Depot?
Is like on one of these runs.
Steal someone else's junk mail? Dude, sometimes some of these people have like 6, 8, 10 like soaking wet like bags, mopping bags of old newspapers sitting at the end of their driveway, which I get. I actually drove today. I drove past the recycling bins at the end of the driveway, figuring I'll probably go out after the podcast and bring them back in. But that's kind of life. So I know most of these people are not going to read their local circulars. I got to ask you before we hit the podcast, as you can probably see, I am going to enjoy the last of this bottle of Canadian Club, but I'm curious what it is that you were drinking down there in not so sunny South Carolina.
Sticking with Bud Ice for tonight.
Bud Ice.
Bush Ice.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So let's start talking about transgender stuff and abortion. I wanted to talk about AI tonight because that seems to really be in the headlines that I'm seeing. But also, I'm about 2 months into a no news kick. I usually wake up and listen to the news every day, and I've been intentionally waking up and putting on Vermont alternative rock radio 1027 WEQX, and I get just very high line news and mostly just music. And I'm a much happier dude listening to that than I am listening to CNN, MSNBC, WNYC, that kind of stuff. So where are we going with this topic today?
Well, I wanted to start off with a quote from a speaker at CPAC maybe a month ago.
Throw some context in there first.
Well, all right. So CPAC is an annual conference. It's the Conservative Political Action Committee. And so every year they get together and throw a conference, and they have like it's basically a place to look for where conservatives are looking to take their policy agenda in the next year. It's what does conservative politics want to look like, right?
Okay.
And one of the speakers there said, and since I want to quote this,
Which I think you should.
And of course now my research department fails me.
Oh, what happened to your Google tab that was open? I thought you had this Google tab open, man.
I'm firing the research assistant and I'm finding someone else.
I love when you actively do research and open new windows that are big and white and bright, and you just turn into a ghost on the screen. So for those who are joining us on social media and cannot see us on the Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube live streams where you can view both of us, you're missing James in all of his translucent glory. Go ahead.
I'm trying to get outside more.
Well, you're very pale, and then you have the white screen reflecting against your skin.
Yeah. All right. So here,
let me up. Tell me.
The guy says, and I quote: "If transgenderism is false, as it is, if men really can't become women, as they cannot, then it's false for everyone. If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of our people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. It is all or nothing." End quote.
Should we eradicate them with the Jew lasers?
So, yeah, I think if you replace transgenderism with Jews, you all of a sudden sound like we're about 80 years in the past, and not in a good way.
No, yeah, in Auschwitz and in Germany. So basically what the guy is saying, and not probably aware of how he's coming across just because of his beliefs, he's saying that transgender people and the transgender movement needs to be eradicated. Now, I probably lean more right on this topic than you do, which is why I'm interested in having this conversation. But not being a transgender person, my perspective on it, and we have conversations about bringing, a couple of guests who are transgender on. And if you are transgender and listening to us live, I would love to hear your opinion on this. But today there are no transgender people. There are just straight white American males. So sorry for our perspective, but that is the only one that the two of us can offer.
But both of us know someone personally who is transgender, and I'm sure you've interacted with people that are trans before. My brother had a roommate that was trans in San Diego. So,
but I think the biggest issue with what you were just saying is that transgender people are basic. It's a gender classification among, for lack of a better phrase, almost an ideology, almost a belief system. Okay?
But that's wrong. That's not how it works.
Well,
it's not a belief system.
But let's consider it a belief system, okay? And just for the sake of my argument, and a gender identity. Now, gender is not something that can be discriminated against, and I think that is where any argument against transgenderism probably is going to fall short. Now, the belief system, I think, is still in definition, still being defined. So I'm curious what you were going to say, kind of to counter me saying it's a belief system.
It's a belief system as much as to draw a comparison that's close, but I think a little bit more salient is being straight or being gay a belief system? I would argue it isn't.
Well, I would argue that it is, just as much as any religion is a belief system, right? Like, you're entitled to believe in being Muslim or being Jewish or being Christian or being Buddhist. But the issue is that not everybody's going to agree with that. In actuality, the majority is going to disagree with you, because there is no one religion that occupies greater than 50% of the population. So if you believe that someone can be born a man and become a woman, then that's a belief system. Now, some people say, I'm okay with a man wanting to become a woman, but I don't believe that they are actually a woman. I don't think that women get testicular cancer, for example, or that men can have abortions within their own body. Then that's where that belief system breaks down. And that's where I think the real argument may be, not in the gender identity of things.
I think that's the problem, is thinking the first error I think you're making is that it's not men or women wanting to be the other gender for some reason. Like, I think that that's a misrepresentation of what transgenderism is. Transgenderism is more like you're a man or a woman that was born into the wrong body. And when you talk to trans people about this, they will say, I've never felt like a woman. I've always felt like a man, or the opposite. But like, they're basically saying that
But
the way that they
that's the same thing as being sorry, I have to interject. And before we've really had too much to drink, that's the same thing as being 35 years old and saying, I've never identified as a poor broke person. I'm really a rich person. I don't know what's going on here.
no, that's a false analogy, though.
This is a hand that was dealt to you.
That's not how it works, though.
Well, I would argue that if you were dealt a certain hand of cards, that's your hand. You can't argue that that's not your hand because you don't want it to be your hand, because you don't feel like it should be your hand.
Let me give you this was probably the single biggest piece of information that helped change my mind away from your perspective on this. Did you know that it's possible to be born a woman in terms of like all the features of a woman and have an XY chromosome?
Yes, and there is an element of being transgender, or what's the other word we don't use for transgender anymore? Fuck. What's the word we don't use for transgender anymore?
I don't know.
Ah, Christ! Somebody on social media help me. What's the word we don't use? God. But there are elements of basically being born one way and having other sexual parts, or having.
Oh, you're talking about like being born intersex, or
being born,
or like hermaphrodite.
Or hermaphrodite was the word I was looking for. Being born intersex was basically the point that I was making. That those situations, I think that we can almost all, virtually across the board, right wing, left wing, get on the board, that those are circumstantial situations that need to be taken one by one. Now, the issue is when you have the fourth grader who is 10 years old, who decides that they feel more feminine than they do male, or more masculine than they are feminine. That's where it breaks down. And that's where I'm saying sometimes you have to stick out the hand that you were dealt, and that is to a degree what it is. And
All right, so I need to address these things point by point. So let's come back to the children thing.
Let's start with being born intersex.
Okay, so,
and that's where I'm saying it should be dealt with on a case by case basis.
So, if you're willing to accept that someone who's born intersex, where their genitalia, like if you look at pictures like of people with intersex, like there's kind of a sliding scale where like you can go from like looking very much like a man to looking very much like a woman, and then like it's a perfect continuum where like in the middle you can be like, I don't really know what that is.
Okay.
And so if you can accept that those people who are born with some level of intersex characteristics should be able to choose whether they want to be whether they want to identify as a man or a woman and be able to have reconstructive surgery to make their genitalia more one direction or the other. If you're willing to accept that, then what is so hard to accept about someone who is born not intersex saying the same thing? Why are you drawing the line there?
Well, for the simple fact that they weren't born with conflicting DNA to identity.
Well, so here, there's a
You're
condition called
saying,
Squires.
hold up. You're saying there's a pool of people who have basically who are apples, but the apples are orange on the outside, right? And it's confusing because people don't know whether they're apples or oranges. And then you say you got a separate basket that's apples, but some of these apples decide they want to be oranges. You got another basket of oranges that are oranges. There's no question about it, and they want to be apples.
So
now, none of them exist in the and this is why in that central basket where you have the apples that have the genetics of an orange, and look like an orange, but they happen to be apples. That I can say, you know what, on a case by case basis, everybody's entitled to make whatever decision. And I'm not saying that. And again, I'm not saying that I'm against transgenderism. What I'm saying is I want to work this out and kind of understand it. I just don't think that there's a funny meme that's been going around about a black guy that's like 28 years old, and I don't know what his name is. It's like Joaquin or something. And he goes, basically, I'm actually a 35-year-old white dude with an Ivy League education, and my name is Gene. And he just kind of walks around. And he goes, I don't know this black guy you're talking about, Joaquin. My name is Gene, and I belong to this country club. But you don't belong to the country club. You don't even have a membership. And he goes, no, but this is how I identify. I have a membership. You need to let me in. So it's being something else and then saying you identify, and we're kind of crossing this line that it's in your mind.
So
it's not reality.
Here's what I want you to get to you to understand, though, that you were.
Let's go there. Let's go.
Huh?
Let's
so
go.
The thing is, the people that trans people are not doing this, are not saying I was born a man but I want to be a woman. They're not making first of all, it's not really a decision. If you talk to the people who are trans, they will almost universally tell you this isn't a decision that I'm making. This is, I have always felt this way. Like, I have always identified as being a woman, and I just have the wrong material down there. And let me ask you this. Could you choose to be gay?
I could not. No.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay.
So if you personally wouldn't be possible for you to choose to be gay, then think about transgenderism in much the same way as sexual orientation, where someone who's gay didn't choose to be gay. Someone who's straight didn't choose to be straight. You were attracted to what you're attracted to. Now, the same holds true for trans people, is they didn't choose to be a man. They were born a man, and that's what came with them, but they have always felt like a woman. They didn't choose to have the man's parts on them.
All right, so look, I don't necessarily think that we are arguing about who can be trans and whether it's okay for them to be trans or not.
But I'm trying to get you away from this whole decision aspect. It's not someone deciding that they're going to be trans.
Let's bring it back to under 20 years old.
No, but I want to get this part settled first.
Fine. If you're 36 years old, or you're 24 years old, you're 57 years old, and you decide that you very much identify Caitlyn Jenner-wise with the opposite sex, and that's what you want to be, I don't give a shit. It's your business. It is what it is. The only issue I would say is in the transition when someone is young that I have an issue with. And I, right off the bat, led with somebody who's 12 or 14 years old.
Okay,
Who,
but like
again, like play the cards that you were dealt for a little while, but having your genitalia lopped off
so hang on.
because you feel this way.
Look, as far as this argument goes, I want to be able to build from like I'm trying to build here, and so the first
I
block.
understand you're trying to build, but let's get on the same page. Let's get on the.
All right, so we're on the same page about people that are adults.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not a decision. It's just you
Well,
are.
it is
It's not a decision. It just isn't.
No, I mean, at a certain point, you have to go from wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt to taking hormones and putting tennis balls under your bra and wearing a skirt.
So that's more along the lines of saying
There's a
I am
decision.
no longer going to like.
Yes, there you make a decision to transfer, right? There's a decision that
Transition, yeah.
if you grow up to 36 years old and decide that you want to be a woman, there's a decision that's made in that moment.
Yeah, so there's decisions about how you're going to present yourself to society and whether you want to conform to what society expects of you. Those are decisions, sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're deciding how you feel. And I just want to hit a couple of comments. One comment, and we can get there in a minute, says, what is your opinion on transgender competing with women in different sports? And then a lot of TikTok bashing, my opinion.
Okay, so
let's back up.
The trans people in sports, I would like to. I just want to address that comment really quick and say that, like, of all the debates that are surrounding transgenderism, the debate about, in particularly men that have transitioned to being a woman competing in women's sports, I think that is one of the most interesting debates and one of the few places in transgender topics that there are legitimate points to be made on both sides.
And we've actually talked about this a little bit before live in the podcast, but let's not quite go there yet.
I just wanted to address it to say, like, hey, we're not ignoring your comment.
Fair enough. So let's get. The thing is, we're on the same page about adults. Let's get on the same page for the platform of this discussion, which I feel like I've kind of brought up some devil's advocate kind of arguments, but I want to be able to expand on the conversation we're talking about trans rights and things like that. But I feel like we're having a bit of a disconnect. I'm not exactly sure where that is.
I think we're actually in agreement for adults, and now my job is to convince you to correct some misconceptions about how it's handled in people below the age of 18, and also to try and convince you why it might not be such a bad idea to entertain treating children. And the thing about treating children, first of all,
let me share real quick, because I feel like you've got a lot to say on this. My thinking is we have to draw a line as a society where someone is capable of making their own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And that line it's not going to move once we draw it, which means there's going to be...
no, it can always move.
Well, it can't always move. It can move.
You can always reevaluate as a society.
Yeah, but not on a day-to-day basis. Once we set it, it's going to stay there, and then we evaluate it a year, 5 years, or 25 years, or 50 years after that. But we set a line, which means once we set that line, people on one side of it will be happy, people on the other side of it will not be happy. But we have to set that line. Now, we set the line when it comes to buying porn. We set that line when it comes to buying cigarettes. We set that line when it comes to tattoos, military, driving, buying alcohol. Now, when it comes to your identity, right, we are currently setting that line. Now, obviously, there's parental consent that's allowed in some instances, just like it is if your parent wants to buy you beer and you drink the beer in your house. Like, I don't necessarily know that's okay, but for the most part, it's passable. If the parent allows you to drive a car before you're 16, it is what it is. If a parent gives you the okay to have a tattoo and they sign off on it, legally you can get that tattoo under the age of 18. Now, if you're 12 years old and you tell your mom or dad that you feel like you are of the opposite sex, James, I'll let you take the lead from here.
Okay, so when children present with gender dysphoria and express a desire to start transitioning.
By the way, if you're 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 years old and you're in middle school, just for the record, most of life sucks at that point.
Yeah. But
Your entire identity is changing as the onset of puberty happens. So I just like to set the stage as you're unhappy with who you are. Everybody is happy with who they are.
So when you start as a child, when you open this conversation, probably with your parents first, but not necessarily. But whoever you have this conversation with, like, the steps are almost always going to be starting with like therapy and like psychiatric and psychological evaluations to figure out what is going on and trying and weeding out the kids that are, as you say, just not happy with their lives because they're 12 or 13 and life kind of sucks at that age for everybody, versus the kids that genuinely are like transgender and like genuinely feel as though they are in the wrong body. So you've got, that's your first filter, is you're going to have therapy and weed out as many people as you can.
I'd also like to draw to anyone who's listening to their attention, all three of them, that when it comes to feeling like you're in the wrong body, when you're 12 years old and hair starts coming from weird places and you start having body odor and you start having weird hormonal reactions, everybody feels like they're in the wrong body.
But there's a difference though, because if you talk to people,
you went from being mostly asexual, not being horny, for example, when you're 9 years old, like horny is not a thing, right? You might be attracted to the opposite sex, but being attracted, if you're a guy who's attracted to a girl, that has nothing to do with transgenderism. You could identify it. You could be a guy attracted to a girl at 9 years old, but by the time you're 12, or 14, identify as a woman and still be attracted to women. Caitlyn Jenner, I think, said that she is still attracted to women.
Well, but like, what gender you identify with is completely disconnected from what gender you're attracted to.
Exactly. That's
so you can separate those two and say like they have no bearing on each other.
That's the point that I'm making.
But what I would say,
and then going through puberty and being like, oh, I don't feel like I felt like I was 2 years ago. I feel weird. I don't think this is right. I think most kids are going to feel that.
Okay, so here's the thing. Based on what I have read, like, the feelings that you're in the wrong body don't like start at a certain point. It's something that if you talk to transgender people, they will say, I've always felt this way. It's not like one day they realized, oh, maybe I'll try this. They've always felt that they were in the wrong body. And by the time that they start to put words to it is really as soon as they're given the words to express it.
Well, that's why if somebody who is transgender wants to call in, I'd love to send you a link to join us. Just shoot me a text, 917-545-7515. Again, that's 917-545-7515. Send me a text if you are transgender or you have very strong feelings on transgender, and we'll send you a link to join us in this conversation. I think we would really need the perspective of at least one transgender person to share with us the feelings of transition. But again, it's not taking the feelings of one person does not speak for the feelings of all people.
No, so but like, hold on. I just want to let me finish this up. I'll go quick. So like, let's say you're a kid and you say, I want to be transgender. I need to transition. You go to therapy, and after talking with the therapist and everything, therapist is like, yeah, this is real. The next thing that happens is they're going to put you on like puberty blockers. Now, the puberty blockers are not permanent. At any point, you can stop taking them, and puberty just kind of picks up where it would have already been. So like, it's not like you're losing things or causing permanent damage. You're just delaying things. So you take these puberty blockers so that if it turns out that this person was a false positive for whatever reason, you can just immediately stop taking the medication, and then it's just like nothing happened. You might be delayed in having puberty, but like you will continue to grow up and have a completely normal life. So the whole "it's just a phase" kind of a thing, the puberty blockers that they give these kids are a way to buy time to determine that it isn't just a phase. One thing that is not happening to kids is having gender corrective surgery. Nobody is performing surgery on children with extreme examples as exceptions. And in those exceptions, when surgery is being performed on kids, it's going in front of like a panel of medical doctors that are like medical ethics experts. So it's not like just one doctor can say like, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to do whatever I want." Like all of these surgeries, which is not many of them, but of all of these surgeries, each and every one is being approved by a medical ethics board because the
Well,
medical ethics board does not want anybody to get sued.
well, of course, but also, I feel like that line of the opinion of these ethics boards is changing, and let me, and also parents. I feel like parents may be inclined to push their child intentionally or inadvertently in a direction of being transgender or the opposite sex. I happen
Well,
to know a small number of young women who have boy children who are raising those boy children to be very effeminate inadvertently, but that's just what they know. They're single mothers, and they're raising their children to be very feminine because that's what they know. Uh, the other point that I wanted to make is when you have a child and you are presented with the birth certificate or all the paperwork, the parents now have the option to choose male, female, or gender X. How do you feel about that? You have a child that comes out with a penis or a vagina, and the option to choose gender X is on the parents.
I don't have an opinion on that at all because I think that in the overwhelming majority of cases, like parents are going to pick the obvious answer.
I
Uh,
almost chose gender X.
what?
We don't talk much about my situation, but I almost was like, let the situation work itself out. If this is an option, like I'll let it.
Well, then,
And I
yeah.
thought,
So,
but then I thought about this child being, 7 years from now, or 17 years from now, or 27 years from now, and having a birth certificate that said that on it, and being like, oh, well, that's going to cause some issues. I assume the child would be more like me than anyone else. But it was just very strange to me to have that option now to decide the gender of a child that came out with an obvious gender. People
my
say
view is that like, who
gender is
cares? You're
people
not harming anybody.
fine, but and again, I think you and I will mostly come to the same point. Who cares? But when it comes to the argument that gender is non-binary, we're arguing X's and O's, right? Or ones. Well, not sorry,
But
binary is ones and zeros. And
well, yeah. So I mean, you could
I
say
would
we're
argue,
arguing X's and Y's, two
well,
X's or
no,
an XY, right?
sure, but let's argue ones and zeros, which is actually the language of binary. I would say that genitalia actually specifically resemble ones and zeros.
All right, fine.
Okay, so I would argue that gender is very much binary.
But
However, you can write
but it
code
actually
in
isn't.
binary. You can write code in binary and not get the output that you were looking for.
Well,
So there,
I mean, if you're writing in binary and you're just trying to get a single variable back that's 1 or 0, you're always going to get a 1 or a 0 back. The
right.
problem is that gender isn't binary. Like first, like, and like
Well,
I'd like you to like I have an article in the Google Doc about Swyer syndrome. You can have someone that is born as a woman. They have female genitalia. If you let them grow up through adulthood, they will present like a female. They will grow breasts. Everything will go as normal. They will have ovaries. They will have a uterus. They will be a female body. They will have an XY chromosome.
which means that they have the male chromosome.
Right. But they will function as a female. And the reason for it is like they were born with an XY chromosome, but you need to have what's called the SRY gene activated, which will trigger the XY chromosome to express male characteristics. So you could have a female with an XY chromosome.
Yeah.
So if you want to say genetically male or genetically female, well, it's just not that simple.
But that person is still expressing themselves and identifies as a female.
But
so
if they were to express themselves as a male, like you could make the argument.
Let me hold up. Let's back up. What are we arguing about? Because I feel like it's actually nothing.
My argument is that
if somebody
saying gender is binary is wrong.
But I think it is. I think it is for the most part binary.
It isn't, though. The only reason you think it's binary is because
this person was born with a zero.
Years we've thought it to be.
But we're still defining. But what are you talking about? We're still defining things in definition of man or woman.
Right.
That's binary. There's two options.
Right. And what I'm saying is that we probably need to rethink this. Is that we're
so let's get on that page.
We're handcuffed by
if we're
millennia of tradition here.
Yes. So if you and I are having this conversation and saying that we're defining things in two categories, that is by definition binary. Now, let's step away from gender being binary and let's take it one step back and call it gender identity, which I would argue is not the same thing as gender, right? Because gender, I think we can all agree, is male or female. Now, when you start introducing gender identity, where you can be male by genetics or you can be female by genetics and identify or express as the other, we're still speaking in binary, right? Now, if you want to occupy the space between, I think that would be more of a hermaphroditic space, right? But if you want to occupy the space between, which, by the way, I live in New York City, not currently, but I basically live and work in New York City. That's not uncommon. I see a number of people on a daily or several, at least a week, who I'm not sure are men or women. And I don't have an issue with that, but I would think that would be the situation where somebody basically is gender identity non-binary, non-specific at least.
Maybe, but I keep on coming back to you're a female born with an XY chromosome. If you do a genetic test on them, you're going to come back and be like, this is a male, but they're female.
Okay, and we're still measuring things in binary.
Yeah, so I guess if you want to talk about, like, if you want to say gender is binary insofar as, like, genetics and reproductive capabilities go, fine. But it still gets confusing because of the thing that I've said, like the XY female. That happens.
Okay.
It's medically documented.
So let's move on from our conversation about about the definition of gender and about the definition of transgender. Let's talk about everyday life. Let's talk about the laws, because we really wanted to talk about political shit today. And I think this is where it's getting messy, and I think this is where you and I will actually vastly agree with the legislation that's being proposed right now to really make transgender.
There's a lot of legislation out there banning gender-affirming care for youth. And I think one of the misconceptions and willful misrepresentations from the progenitors of this legislation is that you've got just rogue doctors cutting off kids' genitals, which just isn't happening. And that the vast majority of gender-affirming care for people below the age of 18 is going to be in the form of either therapy or just puberty blockers as a manner of buying time, all of which is non-harmful and completely reversible. And so what you have, these laws are really just designed.
Joel, let me ask. Hold up on that. So if you're 14 years old and you take a testosterone blocker, and then for 6 years.
So it would be a puberty blocker. I don't know. I don't know if it's testosterone blocker. I don't know the science of this well enough.
It's testosterone that's flooding your body, right? So
there's more than just testosterone going on. If you're born a male and you're going through puberty, like it's more than just testosterone that is fueling puberty.
So
it's primarily, but not exclusively.
It's predominantly testosterone. So you're basically warding off testosterone. And there are other factors. So you push that off for 4 years or 6 years. Now you're 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling if you push off, and I don't think we have any data on this. I actually don't think any data exists. Although I'm sure there's some in the works right now, that we push off puberty for 6 years, 14 to 20, and then say, this person changed their mind. They didn't lose any time. They'll be able to regain any lost traction. I don't think that's true. I don't think
we don't know. I'm not saying like the medical community, because I'm not part of the medical community. Like there might be an answer here. I don't know, but I think from the research I've done, the indications are that delaying puberty doesn't really have any negative consequences, because if you just basically kind of go into like puberty stasis for 4 years and resume, like it basically just picks up where it left off. And so you might be delayed where like you're going through puberty at 18 or 19 instead of 12 or 13, and that's going to carry some risks just because like you're going through something at a different point in life than everybody else around you. So like there's no behavior in the world that is without some form of risk, but the people that like the people that are choosing to go onto these puberty blockers, again, it's not a decision that's taken lightly. And the doctors are going to be explaining to them all the things that can and will happen, and they're making this choice for themselves.
All right. So let's get into everyday life. Let's get into.
Hold on a sec. I've got a comment.
All right. What's your comment? Coach, cancel.
Here. So Kevin says the lack of evidence of delaying puberty by 6 years is indicative no one goes through a gender identity disorder as a phase for 6 years. So the lack of data might be indicative that the people that are going on these puberty blockers are not regretting their decision.
Okay, fine, but I also don't think we've been having this conversation for 6 years. I think we've been having this conversation for 6 months or 18 months at the longest. It hasn't. This is newer than Black Lives Matter. This is newer than Donald Trump. This is newer than Biden. This is a new forefront of conversation, and I'm sure there is some data out there.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to say
hold up. Listen to me. It's not. There's not a lot of data on it, and there could be some data over the last 6 or 10 years, but it has not become super prevalent. And I think I'm listening to this audiobook right now called Influence, and literally the chapter that I was on my ride home was how suicides tend to increase. So when there's a suicide of somebody who's in their 20s, suicide rates for other people in their 20s goes up. When there's suicides of people who are early teens, the suicide rate for early teens goes up. Obviously,
you're talking about copycat phenomenon, which happens in practically every behavioral sphere.
Every behavioral sphere, exactly. So if there's a high rate of suicide between people who are 40 to 50 years old, suicide rates, and it's publicized, the suicide rate for 40 to 60-year-olds goes up. Mm-hmm. But right now we're talking about transgender identity and people changing their gender.
Yep.
Now, because it's in the forefront of the news, front page news, that there are going to be a lot of people that jump on this bandwagon. Now, I'm not saying that it hasn't been going on for 10 years or 14 years, but what I'm saying is that the weight of the bandwagon hasn't reached maximum capacity until recently.
Okay,
so we're going to see that play out for another 4 to 6 years.
So hang on. There's a couple things I want to say here. So the first is, like, I completely agree with you in terms of the timing, in terms of the amount of public attention paid to this issue. I'd say in the last 2 years we've really seen it. However, just because we've been paying attention to it for the last 2 or 3 years doesn't mean that the medical community hasn't been working with this for far longer. And The second thing is like you in regards to the whole copycat phenomenon. That's why when anybody at any age presents to a doctor or somebody, "Hey, I'm transgender," the first thing the doctor's going to recommend to them is therapy and either a psychologist or a psychiatrist to evaluate them. And that first step should weed out practically all of the copycats.
I don't necessarily think it will. Either way, look, I want to. Can we move on to everyday life as being transgender? That's what I want to get into, and current legislation.
So, yeah, I mean, my view is that the current legislation of banning gender affirming care for kids is just harmful to kids. And like
And again,
Texas,
that's what I said 10 minutes ago about drawing the line. That on one side of the line you're going to have happy people, the other side of the line you're going to have unhappy people. But we have to draw that line somewhere, right? If you can't get a tattoo until you're 18, but you can have gender affirming surgery
you,
at
in
12
order,
years old or at 14 years old, or hormonal therapy, right?
so
Which is not, which is
as I
not
said, if you're like,
permanent,
if we
but
go with the
also
extreme case of the surgery,
but also
that has to be applied. That has to be approved by a medical ethics board. It's not like one tattoo artist says, "Oh, I'll do this." It would be, imagine if you had 20 tattoo artists that all said, "Hey, if you want to do this, we all have to approve."
I don't
And
know
instead
that
of having the
training.
training of a tattoo artist, they've got 7 years of school plus residency plus specialized training in medical ethics, which is probably another 3 or 4 years. So these people have 10 to 15 years of experience dealing with medical ethics issues before they even get to sit on a board that makes these decisions.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily know that I trust this board for the same reason I don't trust Reader's Digest in suggesting to me a toaster, or if I look at the popular reviews for a refrigerator or a TV, I don't necessarily trust the popular opinion on that.
But
Also,
medical ethics boards aren't making popular decisions.
okay, fine, but also when it comes to a jury of my peers, I don't necessarily trust that jury.
Right, because the jury of your peers is randomly selected. A medical ethics board is very specially selected.
Well, but we are selecting people given the current zeitgeist, which is we're selecting these. They're not appointed for a lifetime like the Supreme Court.
A medical ethics board is going to consist of people with varying opinions. You might have some people that are more on the liberal side, and knowing doctors, you're going to have some people that are more on the conservative side. So to pass a medical ethics board, you need to be able to provide a really strong medical reason for doing something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in front of the ethics board.
I don't think that we are stacking ethics boards or any boards these days with a diversity of opinions. I think that whoever is occupying any board these days, that particular board itself is much more slanted in one direction than being more center. That's all that I'm saying.
If the direction that a medical ethics board slants is any way, it's going to be the way to reduce the liability for the hospital performing the surgery.
I don't think the medical ethics board is taking any liability for shit that happens at the hospital, though.
No, the hospital is going to rely on the medical ethics board's recommendations in the event that they get sued for malpractice. Because if the hospital performs a surgery and they get sued, they can say, this medical ethics board said it was okay.
But enough time hasn't happened that even any of these court cases have hit a judge, right? Like
that's because nobody's suing for this.
Arguably, yes, but it's a short amount of time, again, because this is the zeitgeist, right? It's only recently become popular conversation that we're talking about this. It's only recently popular conversation. 4 years ago, it was not, right? Pre-coronavirus, nobody was talking about transgenderism. They were talking about Caitlyn Jenner, but Caitlyn was an outstanding person. Actually, Caitlyn was pre-corona, right?
Oh, yeah, by a lot.
By the way, I have no issue with. I also, just for the record, I have no issue with transgender people whatsoever.
I have a big issue with Caitlyn Jenner, but it has nothing to do with transgenderism.
What does it have to do with celebrity?
No, her being a shitty person.
I don't have any idea about. I'm pretty sure she supports Trump, and she's more Republican.
Yeah, she like there's all sort like do your research, Ben. She's a terrible person. Has nothing to do with her being transgender.
So let's back up into an area that's shittier for us to discuss: the pronouns. Dude, we're fucking almost an hour into this conversation, but can we
Well,
talk
that
about
means
pronouns?
abortion next week.
Yeah, it sounds like. Can we talk about the issue with pronouns?
I don't see what the issue is.
Well, I think it's confusing, and I think the fact that transgender people have commandeered an existing pronoun that means more than one, and I don't think that transgender people mean to imply that they are more than one gender. I think they mean to just imply that they are transgender or that they are a woman, right? So if somebody wants to be called she, then she should be called she. If somebody wants to be called he, then he ought to be called he. But somebody who's in the mix of things being called they makes things really confusing to me. It
I don't
makes
see why it should.
Well, I think because it means more than one person. I told you about the radio story that I
Use
listened to.
I guarantee you that you have used the singular they in the last week.
No, I'm positive I have. I'm positive I have. But it meant that there was some indistinction there, right? Uh, the issue is that they is a plural pronoun.
But
So imagine a transgender person saying, "We went to the store today, and then we picked up the mail, and then we cooked lunch." And you said, "Oh, who else was there?" And they said, "No, it was just us."
well,
What do you
that's
mean?
not what
And they
the
said, well, no, because they and them transfers. That's when you're talking. That's second person. When you translate that pronoun into
they and
singular.
them is third person.
Okay, sorry, you're right. The second person is you. Third person.
Second person plural would be the South's favorite word, y'all.
You know, so let's take third. So when you're talking about the third party, and you say them or they, and then you talk about first person. The first person
I.
of they or them would be us or we.
Like no, first person plural would be we.
Sure, first person plural,
Third person singular would be he or she. And what what you're saying is
or
that
them,
having
or them.
third person singular be also being they is confusing to you, and I don't think it should be
But it's the
because
plurality. It's the plurality of the meaning of they.
well, I'll give you a very easy example as to how common this is and how stupid the objection is.
Okay,
Okay, I'll give you like a 3 sentence example.
I love it.
I was refereeing a soccer game, and after I made a call, the coach completely blew up at me. So I showed them the red card and sent them off.
Okay.
Singular, one coach, but I said I showed
Also,
them the
also,
card.
also in the same sentence, it was implied who you were talking about.
Right, but it's a singular they. So if I
Gender,
say,
gender indiscriminate in that sentence.
yes, I didn't say whether the coach was a man or a woman, but I could also say I was hanging out with Justin at their house.
Hold up, but no, you wouldn't say I was hanging out with Justin at their house. That wouldn't make sense.
It,
But I was
it
talking
makes just as much sense as the previous sentence about me tossing the coach.
no, it doesn't because in that sentence we knew you were talking about a singular person. Now, if you said I was hanging out with Justin at their house, somebody would ask you whose house,
I'd say Justin's,
and
and that's it.
why wouldn't you say at his house?
Well, I would say because Justin identifies as a they.
Well, that's confusing because so now we're having this whole conversation about how it's confusing, and the issue is you could have said his house, which is why it becomes an issue. So we have a comment from Sasha saying they, them are the non-binary people, and it does get a bit confusing. Seeing Ezra Miller referred to as they in the media when we know he's just one guy is weird.
So actually, Sasha's echoing your point, and I'm actually going to agree with you guys that
it introduces confusion in some cases. That's all.
It's just an adjustment, man.
I think just for the record, if people said Zay or Zim or Pim and we just all adapted to it, The fact that it was unique, I'd be way more.
How
Again,
about it?
I probably honestly, like if I was to have this conversation 3 years from now, I'd probably say that sounds retarded. I sound like an idiot. All I'm saying is that given our current situation, it's confusing and introduces confusion scenario by scenario. I don't think it's the most ideal pronoun. Now, that
I think if you could invent a new one, as like a non-binary pronoun, just go ahead and invent that, and like we all adjust, like, and then keep the they as a plural. That's fine.
But also, I think most transgender people want to transfer gender and not occupy the non-binary. Somebody who's born a man who feels like a woman wants to become a woman, be called her. Somebody who's born a woman who wants to become a man wants to become a man, be called him. Right? End of story. Now we have an uptick of people.
Yeah, the vast majority of people would rather be a he or a she.
Yeah. And I think the people that want to be called they are kind of jumping onto the bandwagon and just saying, well, my mind's not made up yet, so you just got to bear with me and deal with me being offended, which means you ought to go to shame jail if you offend me.
Well, and so this is where my lack of knowledge is going to show, because I can understand where you're coming from on like I don't understand the non-binary in the same way that like I can understand where trans people are coming from, but and this is a very limited sample size, but one trans person I know started as a male, then identified as non-binary, and is now trans. So I think
is now female.
Is now a trans female.
So just for the record, trans by definition means in the middle of changing.
Yeah. Right? This person I know is now female. Was born a male, then was non-binary, is now a female.
And when you told me this, I was live access removed. We definitely just lost TikTok. I don't know.
Well, we made it 55 minutes.
We made it 50. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Your live was suspended for violating our terms of service. Read more. Do you agree with our decision?
No.
No. All right.
We're trying to have a conversation here.
Yeah, but no one's having this conversation. So I'll go back to TikTok later. I feel like that got fucked up. But I think so when you told me that this person that we grew up with basically was now a woman, I said to you, oh, I thought this person was non-binary. And I was really surprised that he was now a she. I thought he was a they. And I would not have argued against the term they. Also, this is like a friend of ours. I mean, him, her, them, and I, all of us, all 7 of us, are not that close. However, we were close many years ago. We existed in the same sports team. We existed in many of the same circles. This is a close by proximity friend of yours, and we spent a lot of time together. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say a close friend of mine, but him, her, and I have been on. Again, I'm speaking in past tense, so I'm saying him, so it's a little confusing. And I'm also trying to be super respectful, and but on many a long run together. Now, when you start hitting the 4 mile, the 6 mile, the 8 mile, the 9 mile, when it comes to a run, like you are sharing your innermost secrets, right? You have the endorphins flowing. You are as honest as it gets, and this is a person that we used to almost be brotherly back in the day because we go on these fucking 8 mile runs. It's a little confusing for me, but again, this is somebody also I'd like to bring on the podcast and just have a conversation with because I'd like to know all about it. But again, when you said that this person, a friend of ours, is now a female, I was caught up in the fact that I thought that she was a they. And again, the they is the transitional territory, right? That
it can be for some.
And also, some people are happy to be in that. I
think some people just don't want to be bound by the societal expectations that we place on either men or women.
But also, if you have long hair and you have a C cup and a big butt and you wear skirts and you don't want to be bound and you want to be called they, like that's confusing as fuck, right? Like if you have a beard, all right, and chest hair and you don't want to be bound, so you want to be called they, that's confusing as fuck. However, if you have longish hair, a non-defined jawline, and you wear pantsuits and light colors, like that's like you can occupy whatever you want, and cool.
So hey, hold on, I've got some closing thoughts on this because I'm going to go along with you on this.
Well, we got 30 seconds left, so
Right. So like you're talking about like it
we
being
haven't, by the way,
confusing.
talked about sports. Just
Yeah, yeah, we'll have to do that too. But like, it's okay for most people to find these things confusing, just because someone's acting in a confusing way, as long as they're not harming anybody else, which these people aren't. Then why do we give a flying fuck what they do?
All right, that's our outro music. Let's. I'm just going to pause on that. We're going to lose the Instagram stream. By the way, if you are listening to us on Instagram, you should be joining us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch Live. Or if you have not already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or listen to any of our audio podcast platforms on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and all the rest of the podcast platforms. I just want to touch on that, and then we'll jump off air.
I want to hit Sasha's comment before we go.
I was going to say, and we should also hit Sasha's comment. Go ahead, read the comment.
So Sasha says, I'm in the LGBT community, and I'm still not sure what the fuck non-binary means. Back in the day, if you were a girl and dressed like a boy, you were just considered a tomboy, and now you're just non-binary. So I would agree that like there are some definitions that probably need to be refined.
But also the LGBTQ, XR, et cetera community.
LMNOP.
This is not a community. Okay, this is effectively a group of accepting people with divergencies. However, if you have one of those divergencies, if you're non-normal, okay, it doesn't mean that you necessarily, if you're gay, right, if you're or lesbian, it doesn't mean that you agree with everybody who wants to do transgender this or transgender that.
And even if you're gay, there's probably lots of things that like the gay community does that you don't like.
There are gay Christian people who don't support gay marriage because the Bible doesn't allow for it.
Yeah, let's make sense of that one.
Well, let's make sense of the Bible. So bring me back to the point that you were just making before we got cut off of the Instagram feed.
Oh, just like if you've got someone that presents as a female but says they're non-binary, or someone that's a male that presents as non-binary, or you've got someone that looks like a dude but says they're a woman, or someone that looks like a woman that says they're a dude, like I think it's okay to have a confused reaction to that, because like for the longest time, like we're raised in a society that has a pretty clear conception of what man and woman is, and so when you see someone that's behaving one way and presenting it a different way, confusion's a natural reaction.
But I think what we're seeing right now is that confusion in the super woke culture, that confusion is now being considered offensive to those people.
Well, I think you've got a small but very vocal minority that would say that, and I think they give the transgender community a bad rep, because yeah, I've had people tell me that like so I would not date someone who is a transgender female, and I've had some people say you're being insensitive for that perspective, and I say no. And I asked our friend who is trans female, and I said, help me resolve this. On one hand, I think transgender people should be accepted for the gender that they want to identify as. On the other hand, if someone says to me, I'm a trans female, I won't consider them for dating. I said, is this hypocritical? And our friend said, no, you're entitled to like what you like.
Well, let me ask you a question. If you're Jewish and you want to date somebody and marry someone who's Jewish, or you're Christian, you want to date and marry somebody who's Christian, or you're black or white, or short or tall, or fat or skinny, is it discriminatory to have your preferences, whether it falls along protected classes or not?
I don't think so.
Well, I think where we're going now with legislation and the general zeitgeist is that you should be, at the very least, slapped on the wrist for having your own preferences.
I don't think.
And I'm saying we're actually going further than being slapped on the wrist. And the funny thing is, it's coming from the liberal end. And what does liberal mean? Generally, it means hands off, like everybody can do what they want. Right? And that's coming from the pursuit of freedom end.
Well, yeah, and then on the other side of like the conservatives trying to in their own words eradicate transgenderism, so the party of freedom is the one casting the most restrictions.
Wait, I think both parties would look at each other and say they're casting the most restrictions.
Well,
the issue is that and I think that's, and probably we should end on the note that you tried to end on, actually. But I think that where we stand right now is that both parties are trying to legislate their way to a solution.
I think the difference is, I would agree with you, but the thing is, it's again a scalar difference, where one party is saying this must be eradicated using almost violent,
I don't think most Republicans are saying that they need to eradicate transgender people.
No, but at their conference that is kind of proclaiming their values, they've got a speaker that's saying that, and he wasn't booed off stage.
Okay. All right. And AOC doesn't get booed off stage when she says everybody should have the right to housing and that landlords just need to not evict people even though they're not paying rent. She doesn't get booed off stage, but that doesn't make any sense. So
yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. And yeah, AOC says a lot of crazy stuff that I don't agree with. Even though I agree with her more than I disagree, there are some things that she says that I'm just saying that's an economically terrible idea.
You want to read this last comment, and we'll take it. We'll move on and close.
Yeah, I want to read this. I like this. Sasha says, nothing wrong with preference. That's a thing now in the trans community, where they'll start to try and gaslight you and tell you if you don't want to date them, that you have a genital preference. Like, well, fuck yeah, I have a genital preference. Like, if I didn't have a genital preference, you know what I would do? I would date dudes, because it's a lot easier.
All right. Yeah, probably. Also, you have the Grinder app for that.
Huh?
So you also have the Grinder app for that.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, it's like, yo, if I could choose to be gay, I totally would be. I mean, I don't have to worry about being pregnant and like.
You and I have talked about this before. If we were gay, we would find a dude with a similar body structure as us, with a good selection of clothes, and then things would be cool. You get along, and you can wear each other's clothes.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, like it's impossible for me to meet women. If I was gay, I could just go to the gay bar. I could clean up. Like, just can't get there, man.
I mean, you can go there. You drive over there.
I could still clean up at the gay bar. It's just the experience would be much less preferable for me now, if not being gay.
Yeah,
Sasha says gay dudes are just as messy as women.
All right. So on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We went a little over time, and don't forget, you got to subscribe. You got to watch our podcast on YouTube. You got to comment, guys. You got to let us know that you're there. And I appreciate the live comments, but don't forget to subscribe, because that's how we really know you're there. And comment and interact with the audio podcast and the video podcast on YouTube. So, well, thank you guys for joining us. James, I got nothing else. Anything you want to add last minute?
Nope.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And adios.
Thank you for joining us in this episode. Let me know what you thought. Were we biased? Were we on one side of the aisle, the other side of the aisle? What do you think? I'd love your opinion, of our opinion, or your own opinion on this topic. Throw it in the comments.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.